So at this point, I would like to show you guys the interview that Ramona Masacci and I did with Kesha Ram Hinsdale. She is running for the House seat in Vermont. Vermont is one district state. The whole state of Vermont is the one district. So she's running to represent the whole state of Vermont. She's been in the Vermont State Senate for some time and is now running for Congress. And Kesha, also for the MMT activists out there, she said after the interview that she has a couple copies of The Deficit Myth and is really trying to read up on MMT and educate others in Vermont and the DC area on MMT should she be elected. So to those who might have some quibble with Kesha's response to the pay for question in the interview, I just do want to assure you, we talked to her afterwards, and she does seem to have a very strong understanding of the mechanics of MMT, and wants to spread MMT around when she is elected to DC. So this is Kesha Ram Hinsdale discussing her campaign for Congress. And for anyone interested, I threw her website in the description box. It's also up on the screen, as well as her Twitter handle. So if you're interested in looking into her campaign, those are the resources to do so. Huge thanks to Ramona Masacci, as always, for joining every week to participate in these interviews. And you know, this was a really great discussion. So here's to hoping Kesha can pull that out and become a member of Congress here this year. This is Kesha Ram Hinsdale on her congressional campaign. Very happy to be back with our latest candidate segment with Ramona Masacci. We're here with Kesha Ram Hinsdale from Vermont. Kesha, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me, Luke and Ramona. It's a privilege.
Of course. If you just wanted to start by giving the audience a little introduction, what brought you into politics? What's your background like? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. You know, it's really, we started connecting through a mutual friend who's my mechanic, actually, who's also known to some as the Bernie Mall Punk, Mike Blair. And he's just been a great friend and supporter for so long. And only, you know, during our friendship, during the rise of Bernie's presidential races, did we start to talk about his colorful past as a mall punk. So thanks again for having me. My journey is a pretty long one. I have actually served, and people may not see by my appearance, but I have served in the state legislature for 10 years. And that decade of service has been spread out over 14 years. I took a 4-year break after 2016 and really kept my ear to the ground. And 2016 to 2020, as we know, was the time when we were all wondering what was going on in the country and how we could bring people together in a new and different way and actually accomplish things for them. My journey begins in my Indian immigrant father and Jewish American mother's Irish pub. You know, I was sweeping peanut shells off the floor and pitching in the family business at a very young age. And at the same time, unfortunately, the business didn't last. Their fortunes turned. My parents ended up, you know, ending their marriage. And my father really never could afford to retire. He stayed in the food service industry, which he really loved and gave him a lot of joy and life. And at the same time, I knew that he was really straining his body to remain in that work. Ultimately, my father passed away holding a catering tray in his hands at a Silicon Valley gala. And the juxtaposition of that has never really left me, you know, and it's the reason that I get up every day to fight for the dignity of working people and everyone's ability to enjoy all chapters of life with some sense of peace and stability. So that has really shaped me in many ways. I consider myself a climate immigrant to Vermont. I wanted my future children to have cleaner air and cleaner water than I experienced growing up in Los Angeles, where the air quality in some places is equivalent to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I, you know, ended up being very active from a young age. In fact, I introduced Bernie Sanders in his first bid for the US Senate when I was a sophomore in college in 2006. So a little bit of ancient history there now, when he, you know, was a newer candidate. And a lot of people encouraged me to run for office after that. So I started in the legislature in 2008 when I was 22, and the rest is history. And here I am, a 35-year-old candidate for Congress, hoping to support working families, our climate, and our democracy as Vermont's first Congresswoman.
What does your district look like, and how are you reaching out to them?
Well, that's the easy part in Vermont. We're one of the smaller states in the country. It is the entire state. So, I am running to serve the entire state of Vermont, which is actually makes things a little easier. You're not looking at boundary lines like we are starting to see around the country. And Vermont at the same time is, a pretty racially homogenous state. It's one of the whitest states in the country. It's an older state demographically. And so it's meant a lot to me that I've been able to build bridges and, in fact, become the first woman of color in the state Senate, representing the largest county in the state. That's about a third of the Democratic vote.
And what do the dynamics of the race look like? Is there an incumbent? Is this an open seat? Who else is running for this seat? What is the race shaping up to look like?
Yeah, sometimes we get so immersed in our own politics here in Vermont, we think it's the world. So as folks may or may not know, we have had a senator in the U.S. Senate who served for 48 years, Senator Patrick Leahy. We have really appreciated his service. He started in the Senate at my age, at 35. He had been a state's attorney here and, a pioneering civil rights leader, went on to the U.S. Senate and focused on shoring up our role abroad in instilling the Constitution and democratic values across the globe, and served as chair of Senate Judiciary for many, many years. He is retiring after 48 years, and that has left a vacant seat alongside Senator Bernie Sanders that currently it looks like our one member of Congress is likely to be the front runner for and remain the front runner, Congressman Peter Welch. That opens up our one congressional seat in Vermont for the first time in 16 years since I introduced them both on stage at the university. And Vermont is now the last state in the country to have never sent a woman to Washington. So there are 3 women in this race. And, I think it's mostly just exciting for Vermont to have 3 women who have different lived experiences, different perspectives, different things they bring to the table running. And so far it's remained very positive. I would absolutely say that I have cemented myself as the progressive in the race, and I have the support of a lot of Bernie surrogates at this point, including his daughter, Senator Nina Turner, the woman who made Bernie's mittens for Inauguration Day, a teacher here named Jen Ellis. So, really building that support from labor, from the environmental community, including Bill McKibben, who founded 350.org and has been a well-known climate leader. So really feeling that my 10 years of progressive change making in the legislature is really demonstrating our place in the race. And hopefully from a state like Vermont, we're going to send a progressive leader to Washington.
Is that an open primary that you guys have there, or what's the dynamic? Or will it be a Democrat against a Republican?
The primary is probably easily going to be the contest. We know there's one Republican running so far who has run in local races and regional races and not gained much traction. So the race will likely be decided in the primary. Every state considers themselves special. I think one of the unique things about Vermont that only a couple other states have as well is we have what are considered open primaries. Anyone can pick up the Democratic primary ballot and vote on it. You don't have to register by party, so we don't know there are X percentage of registered Democrats in the state. People can decide to pick up the Republican, Independent, Democratic, or progressive ballots, but the race and many progressive candidates will be on the Democratic ballot.
Are you reaching outside of I'm going to mess up the name, Chittenden County?
That was a good try, Chittenden County. We have
Chittenden County. Because it seems that the focus is within the county, and once you reach outside of that county, that's when you really gain the votes needed to win.
I was just having a conversation with a supporter this morning who is in the gateway to the Northeast Kingdom. The Northeast Kingdom of the state is our most rural part of the state, a part of the state that's considered a bit more conservative. Probably the only part of the state where Trump won some districts, and our state has the lowest support for Trump in the country. But we're also a state where the only person to get more votes in the last election than Joe Biden was our Republican governor. So we have a real libertarian streak. And I was talking to a new supporter up there who, you know, by all intents and purposes, he's an architect, he's a builder, he had a cabin life sweatshirt on, he has a pickup truck. And he said, well, my issues are, anti-racism, sustainability, police accountability, demilitarizing the police, and healthcare. And I just said to him, talking to you gives me hope that my message resonates with Vermonters who otherwise I might pass on the road and think they're never going to vote for me. And so, we have this really broad and diverse coalition that we're building across the state. I even have, I'll go on conservative talk radio and say, I'm a proud, proven progressive. And people will call in and say, what we love about you is that you answer the question and you give an honest answer. We know where you stand and we know what you stand for. And that's something we can get behind. So I've been amazed that, my message and being clear about where I stand is what resonates with folks, not necessarily, just trying to play to a certain crowd. So the second we announced, we traveled to almost all of the B towns in every county. And so we'd go from Barton in the really northeast corner of the state down to Bennington in the southwest, corner of the state, and just reach everyone, have, tens of people come out and just want to hear our message. And there's a lot of folks who think if we haven't sent a woman to Washington, let's also send, a progressive woman of color and catch up with the conversation happening in the rest of the country.
Absolutely. How are you guys addressing? I'm sure that there's some challenges in a pandemic trying to run a campaign. I mean, I've talked to a number of candidates that have struggled with, for a lot of grassroots candidates, having that door knocking and the volunteers that really can be kind of the lifeblood of the campaign. How are you able to get around some of those challenges, and how are you reaching voters?
Yeah, being around people is one of my favorite parts of the campaign. So you really have to set aside your own personal disappointment that you can't constantly be around other folks. And at the same time, we are seeing that people are building, Zoom and politics into their lives a lot more right now, just when they're making dinner for their families or driving home from work, being able to tune into what's happening politically and engage has become a lot easier. So next week, we'll have a town hall on our nurse staffing crisis here in the state. Many states are facing a shortage of nurses, of educators, of frontline workers in general. And Vermont is one of the hardest hit in terms of nursing staff. So we're going to talk to some frontline nurses and start to build a conversation around what we know Vermonters are worried about, which is workforce and, healthcare. And those kinds of things, people love to tune in and engage when they can. I think what we're seeing is that people are able to get engaged and consume information on their own time. And that's been, generally fine for us. I certainly miss the in-person stuff. Every meeting we have digitally, I keep saying, we'll see you in the spring in person when it's safe to be outside. But for now, we're doing the best we can to reach people where they are and break through isolation and talk to them about what matters to them.
Do you support the federal job guarantee, and how would you use it in your state?
So I'm a big supporter of the federal job guarantee and the PRO Act because I think they have to go hand in hand in many ways. We need to not just think about, having jobs available to folks, but jobs with good wages, good benefits, and the opportunity to organize and collectively bargain if one chooses. We're even seeing that in the exciting, work and organizing happening around the country with Starbucks workers. I think it helps us change the narrative that there's such thing as a low skill job. When, I think many of us know, and I even said on Twitter, and it went semi-viral thanks to a lot of Starbucks workers who are appreciative. My father, before he passed away, spent a lot of time at Starbucks. It was just a place where he felt like he could be one part anonymous and one part known. And after he passed away, we went back to Starbucks and talked to the workers, and they stopped what they were doing to talk about their memories of my father. And you realize baristas are, people's therapists and support systems, and, help find them resources, make sure they're okay, check on their well-being. And so we're finally having a conversation in this country that there are no bad jobs, just bad paying jobs. And there's no low skill workers, just low paid and low compensation, for our workforce. So, I think we're changing that conversation, and we really need to be able to use this opportunity and moment to compensate workers better, not focus solely on inflation, which is the Republican paradigm around the moment we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a line cook, so I will certainly second this idea that we work our asses off and we just don't get paid. It's not a matter of skill or ability or effort or any of that. I totally agree there. If we were to succeed in passing a jobs guarantee, one thing that I really like about it is that it would be federally funded and then locally administered. Can you talk about what kinds of jobs in Vermont that could produce, and what things in your state could be done if we were able to actually pass such a program?
Well, and first of all, thanks, Luke, for working as a line cook. I mean, I think we have seen in the pandemic, there are no jobs that are, that are unnecessary. There are a lot of facets of our communities that we've started to appreciate a lot more now that we recognize we have a workforce shortage. Certainly we have a lot of need for frontline workers here in Vermont in education and in healthcare. And particularly where we're struggling the most is mental health care, because it's a system that we've underappreciated and underfunded for so long. And I think what we know is that if we fund more crisis work and support the mental health care system, we also keep people away from police and other emergency services that could escalate a situation rather than de-escalate a situation. So we're finally in our state focusing on our mental health care crisis and our needs in education and our state workforce in general. I was the only state senator to stand on the State House steps with our educators and our state employees to protect their pensions. This is a time when we're also saying we have to make drastic cuts in what retirement looks like for our civil servants and frontline workers. That is no way to thank them for everything they've done. And when you talk to people about creating a sustainable path forward for their pensions, they're the ones who should be in the driver's seat about how to direct their future. And so, we definitely have a need for supporting those frontline workers, educators, and mental health care workers, most particularly. And those are systems that pay dividends, that keep other harsher systems and punitive systems from needing to come into play.
When you bring up these structures of stability and placing them into your state, and people ask, well, how are you going to pay for this? How is this going to be supported? Is it going to come out of my taxes? How do you answer that?
So I was on the tax committee as a 25-year-old, our House Ways and Means Committee. And the most important thing I ever learned is that when you're going to raise folks' taxes, you better have a good reason to, and show them, what they're paying for. And I think sometimes that's where Democrats end up falling short, is we sometimes separate the revenue conversation from what we're driving toward. And the media often doesn't help either. I think if you asked most Americans if they wanted to support early childhood education and cutting childhood poverty in half, and then in half again, most people would say, yes, sign me up. That's what I want to be able to support. And what is unfortunate is that we've created so many tax loopholes at the top for the highest income earners, for the 1%, that what people are angry about is not paying their fair share. It's feeling like those at the top are not, and that they're able to get away with, blasting themselves into space while the middle income folks are stuck footing the bill. So we need to close so many of those tax loopholes at the top, make sure that there's no cap on, your tax, what you owe in taxes for Social Security and things like that, just because you're a high income earner. We need to remember that if you make more, you owe more to society, and not let those at the top get away with a lower tax burden than those in the middle class. So, I think it's a basic question of fairness, and the middle class is happy to pay their taxes if they see the wealthiest doing the same thing.
And I think there's some like misconceptions around the differences between how taxes work at the local level and how they work at the federal level, right? So as a state senator, you're budgetarily constrained. You're actually operating within this. You can't just create more dollars, right? And I think when we start talking about the federal level, both parties have pretty well proven that they understand when something like a new war comes along, we have no problem creating those dollars to go do that, or a tax break, as you put it, or research and development for corporations, whatever it might be. We have no problem throwing money at that without increasing taxes. And I think for some people who are used to the their household or their business, they get caught into this paradigm of like taxes to pay for, and it starts to sound irresponsible to propose spending at the federal level. Can you talk about that, dynamic, and how we can maybe address that amongst the communities that so sort of misunderstand federal finance?
It's such a great point. Even so, in our state, we've tried to recreate the child tax credit. And it takes a huge bite out of our budget to try to go it alone as a small state, rather than what the federal government is doing with its, large amount of tax resources available to deploy to domestic needs and to helping lift kids out of poverty here, helping to build infrastructure right here at home, rather than destroy infrastructure abroad, or, give all of our money to fighter jets, which in fact here in Vermont, we are one of 4 homes of the F-35, a very loud and destructive fighter jet that, in fact, as the crisis unfolds between Ukraine and Russia, we have had fighter jets land here in the middle of the night and take off again at sometimes 1, 2 in the morning. And it's so we're feeling the impact of having a lot of, military might and not a lot of support for all the homes around that fighter base, that are not soundproofed, are not weatherproofed, are really struggling with the quality of life impact. So, while we put increasingly a lot of money into our military industrial complex and not questioning it and not having a media that gives it that much, interrogation, we're then faced with, how could we possibly continue this child tax credit? How could we pay for paid family leave? How could we pass the Build Back Better bill and pay for this infrastructure and this human capital investment, whereas we have zero question for our military spending, and we have to switch that paradigm absolutely in this country.
And once you're in Congress, how are you going to bring this forward in a sense where your district and other people across the country understand that, there is a difference between state funding and federal funding, and they work differently, and how they work and how they're able to uplift society as a whole?
Yeah.
How do you present that to people so that they understand?
The good news is we have a great model in Vermont, I believe, with Senator Bernie Sanders. Just having someone who basically will say your choice is between, funding a destructive warplane or, keeping old ladies in their homes. He has the whole, are we going to throw old ladies out on the street? What kind of community and society are we? And so really what is important, I think, is to make these trade-offs visible to folks, is to help them understand what it would look like in their community and who would be impacted. Because most people don't want their grandparents to not have a safe, warm place to live when they retire. Most people don't want to see, folks homeless out on the streets if that can be helped and they can get services and support. Most people want their kids and their neighbors' kids to have access to early childhood education. How we get there, I think, people are fatigued in a pandemic. They don't necessarily want to know all the ins and outs. They're worried about unfolding situations abroad. They're worried about taking care of folks here at home. And I think we just need to tell them and drive home that, we have trade-offs that we're making. And often they're taking dollars out of your community and putting them into destructive tools of war abroad. Beyond that, I love trying to explain tax policy and budgets to folks. I'll go into elementary schools and show them a bag of Twizzlers and a bag of Butterfinger, and I'll say, when we try to tax junk food, one is considered junk food and one isn't. And the one that's not considered junk food is the one that the wheat lobby got exempted. And it's which one has wheat in it, the Twizzlers or the Butterfinger? And the kids get really confused. And it's actually the Twizzlers that are not taxed, because we don't tax wheat products, not the Butterfingers, which would be taxed as junk food. So, what we also have interest groups and lobbyists that get in the way of common sense policy, create carve outs for their folks as long as they have the money. So I think at the bottom of all of this too is campaign finance reform and changing the way folks are elected. Because otherwise, no matter what taxes we levy, there's usually powerful special interests that get themselves exempted. And when they're exempt, everyone else has to pay more.
So you said you support a jobs guarantee. You've talked about a couple other policies, the child tax credit, which obviously was allowed to expire and had for a long time cut child poverty roughly in half. What else are you running on? What is the rest of your platform if you're elected? What big picture policies? How can we actually create structural change here? And I'll preface this with my own and a lot of the people I talk to, sort of disappointment, quite frankly, with some of the people who I think really are great people and well-meaning and progressive and all that kind of stuff, but seem to be very less than effective, I suppose, at fighting the machine by the time they actually get into Congress. Can you talk about how we can get past some of those, I grant you, very difficult hurdles to actually achieve a progressive agenda?
I mean, well, first of all, it really matters who we elect, and I think often the progressive wing of the party has a lot of infighting going on. There's a lot of, who is even better than the other person who's, further to the left. And we should be asking who can be effective, who doesn't walk away from the negotiating table, who has a track record of getting things done. And, to be fair to a lot of our members of Congress, Ayanna Pressley was incredibly effective on the Boston City Council. Ilhan Omar ran incredible campaigns, built new coalitions in Minnesota. Rashida Tlaib, I knew when we were both legislators, myself in Vermont and her in Michigan, they have cut their teeth trying to get real policies passed and trying to find that sweet spot of compromise where you're still getting things done. And I don't think we can let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think you see a lot of progressives saying, we're women of color. We have to walk away with something and bring something back to our communities that they can put on the kitchen table and really experience and feel, and that, works for their families. So, I think in so many ways, there's a lot of moderate forces, there's Democratic holdouts who continue to blame the progressive wing of the party for failure when they're trying to get the president's agenda passed. They're trying, the progressive wing is the one messaging things in a way that doesn't move the Overton window further and further to the right. So, how to be effective, I still think one should try to work with anybody. I always learned that, the majority, if you're doing your work for Americans, the majority steers the ship and the minority points out the rocks, because we're at the end of the day in the same boat. And so there are times when we're going to have to look at what issues are really scaring and keeping up at night the majority of Americans, and make sure we continue to focus on those. And in so many ways, that's jobs, and that's well-being of folks. I did want to say, what sets me apart and what am I running on? I am the climate candidate. I'm supported by Bill McKibben. Nobody, stays up more and thinks more about how to frame for folks how we reframe our entire economy and our entire way of being around a climate future that we need to ensure survival. I am a big supporter of the Green New Deal. I think when we look at who's effective or who's not effective, often what we're seeing is that, people are focusing now on the ideas of those in the progressive wing. And, maybe they reject the candidate or they reject their personality or something that we know, is based on a false premise, but they're picking up their ideas, and those are the ideas of the future. Those are the ideas we're talking about. I have been working on getting an environmental justice bill passed for the last 16 years in Vermont, and it finally passed out of the Senate Natural Resources Committee on Friday on a unanimous vote and is going to pass this year. So help me. And, in many ways, the Green New Deal is going to take years to pass, but we're going to have to do it piece by piece and really show people the value of changing the economy before it's too late, and investing in a renewable energy economy where they see a future and a job. And, that I think we're going to have to show people the value, and then get there piece by piece and build that investment. But we can't walk away because we didn't do it in 2 years or because we lost an election. We have to keep our eyes focused on that long-term prize, because climate failure is our other option.
If I could just quickly underscore one of the points that you made there about the progressives kind of driving the conversation. You mentioned you'd been endorsed by Nina Turner, and I thought I covered kind of the run that she had against Shontel Brown in the special election, and it seemed interesting to me that Shontel crafted her campaign seemingly around trying to frame Nina as though she did not hold the policy positions that she does hold, and then herself kind of taking up that platform. So I think that's an example right there of the progressives kind of driving the conversation, and I just wanted to underscore. I think that is a dynamic that's very real, and gives us some hope, I suppose, that we're moving the needle a little bit. Ramona, I didn't mean to cut in there.
No. Once you get in, will you help other progressives get into office? Because you need a majority of a vote. And if you don't have the majority, you're not going to get anything accomplished. So if you don't have people that understands federal financing and Green New Deal and federal jobs guarantee and Medicare for all, then and want it, you're not going to get it passed. So will you help shape that as you get elected, bringing more people into office who stand behind those policies?
I'm so glad you raised that. And I think it's another thing that sets me apart as a candidate. I started as a 22-year-old woman of color in the legislature. There were moments where I felt really alone, trying to end the school to prison pipeline and reduce the use of suspension and expulsion in schools, or, demilitarize the police and have an independent investigation into use of force. Whatever I was fighting for, there were moments where I felt really lonely. And so I turned around and helped create programs that advanced more women, particularly women with small kids, into office, who really get the need for supports for families. We created a whole institute for people of color to run for office in Vermont, so that we weren't just talking about work that dismantles racism without having people of color, and particularly Black Vermonters, at the center of that change. And so, I have turned around always and created new programs. We're working on something even for local candidates here in Vermont called Vermont Forward, in bellwether communities, purple districts, where there are local elections that could change decisions about, are they going to, vilify critical race theory? Are they going to roll back, infrastructure investments on local select boards and city councils? We are fighting for those very local folks. And I plan to take that fight, not just to Washington, but around the country, to places like Texas and Florida, where we see huge opportunity to gain when we have a coherent, progressive message that speaks to people's needs. But we really have to get past the infighting and not see the progressive message as the problem here. That's what's getting people excited, as you noted, and bringing people out on election day. And it's the question of whether or not we can deliver that, and whether or not we can keep filling the bench with strong candidates. And that's something I've always cared a lot about from local, where we know even around the country, we need people to win school board elections so that we don't lose a whole generation to politicization of our education system. So that remains important all the way to who we send to Washington.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier the Starbucks workers, and I've been really encouraged to be able to cover every week this sort of labor push, the unionizations and strikes and protests and all this walkouts, all this kind of stuff where workers are actually kind of seizing some of their own kind of power and wielding that power. And I'm wondering what you might think of, I've seen a lot of like, for example, More Perfect Union keeps covering this and showing clips of people during these efforts. And it seems like it's not just one group of political ideology that is engaging in these efforts. Do you think that this labor organizing push can be sort of a catalyst for the progressive movement to try to, structurally change our economy and reach some folks that otherwise might have been difficult to reach with our message?
We have always won when the working class and, our social justice leaders see their fight as one and the same. When we find that light at the crossroads, that's the most dangerous thing that has ever existed as an alliance in this country. When, Black farmers and Black sharecroppers and white farmers realize that their struggle has been the same. When, white miners and Black miners in Kentucky and West Virginia realize their struggle was the same. That's when our government even has gotten afraid and sent in forces to reinstill that division and that divide. And so, the more we give in to culture wars, the more we allow ourselves to become divided based on race and, gender and ethnicity, the more we give into this lack of race class solidarity that is the only thing that has ever propelled this country forward. We are due for another reckoning, like we experienced in the 60s, where we need to rebuild a party that has a durable coalition, and labor should always be at the core of that in the Democratic Party. And I think there are many of us in the progressive wing who worry that labor is all of a sudden being marginalized, which is very dangerous if we're going to survive as a functioning party.
How is your campaign going as far as how much money have you raised? How many volunteers do you have? How have you been, what have you been creating, and what does that shape look like right now?
Yeah. Thanks so much for asking. We are feeling really good about, our number one donor base is teachers and educators, bus drivers, which is a really wonderful feeling. We know that folks in the working class are excited and getting engaged in this campaign particularly. And I think we saw that because of pension fights and ways that I've stood up for teachers' right to strike, and, just really supported the dignity of working folks. So we're excited about that. Of course, when you put that up against the machine of DC lobbyists who don't want anything to change and are supporting one of my more moderate opponents, the fundraising mountain that we have to climb is still daunting. So I hope folks will visit the website and chip in what they can, ask questions, engage with our team. We're really trying to build a grassroots bench and a movement here of supporters, volunteers, people who can take our message around the state. And that certainly takes resources, in addition to trying to share our story in broader brush strokes around the state. And, I always feel like we're leading the pack in terms of volunteers because we have more folks than we can easily take on. But we are always looking for more folks to be helpful. And we just are feeling really good about the momentum that we have. I call people and they say, "You're on fire. I saw you here. Now you're calling me," but it can't be me alone. I'm in the state Senate and trying to run a race. So, we are constantly looking for resources, support, and people power to fuel this campaign, which we're feeling great about, but we'll always take that additional help. Absolutely.
So to circle back to one of the policies that Bernie really propelled up, I think during this pandemic, there's been a whole lot of talk about vaccines and masks and things like that. And one thing that I think does not maybe get enough discussion is how much better our response could have been if we had at least Medicare for all, if not maybe an NHS, a real robust single payer healthcare system. Can you talk a little bit about your position on healthcare and what you would do in DC to fight for a more humane healthcare system?
Yes, I'm a huge proponent of Medicare for all, and our state, as folks may remember, around 2011, 2012, tried to advance single payer, universal, unified healthcare in our state. And in so many ways, a state has a hard time going it alone, and we became reliant on being able to garner back some of the dollars that we send to Washington, and be able to build a foundation for this transition to a universal healthcare system. And we weren't ultimately able to go it alone as a state. And it makes me excited about not only what Bernie does every day to fight for Medicare for all and lower costs of prescription drugs, but bills like Ro Khanna has in the House that create dollars, make dollars available to states to keep experimenting with what this should look like. Because changing our entire federal healthcare system is going to be lengthy and challenging, but that's where the dollars are. And so getting those dollars back into the hands of, states where there can be experimentation and a nimble approach to understanding what's going to work and how to make it work is a really helpful step forward. We've worked in our state to lower the age of Medicare, to increase the age of free childcare for kids, to just keep, bringing more and more access to Medicare for all to people in whatever age categories we can build from until we can get there. And we need that help from the federal government. I plan to be that partner in Washington for our state to continue to experiment. But we've seen, as you said, the value of giving people greater access to health care and not centering it around insurance decisions that keep families up at night. So, absolutely want to go and champion that. And we have to recognize costs keep increasing and, it's not making people healthier at the same time. So we need to really reframe not just how we provide and deliver healthcare, but what we consider healthcare and how we start, creating a healthier country and lowering our costs and not focusing so much on invasive procedures and hospital visits and things like that. And right now our system is built for taking care of expensive, sicker people than keeping people healthier. So the whole thing needs to change.
I was actually looking at some Republican research yesterday that came out that was talking about how Medicare for All actually frees up a lot of investment in our economy and frees up resources for other things. And if we actually had Medicare for All, it would actually cost quite less because all of those resources that we could focus on other things like Green New Deal, federal job guarantee, would open up. And it's very interesting to me that Republicans themselves are coming to this conclusion and understanding that this is actually a cost, the benefit to all on every level.
I think the frightening thing is that everyone starts to see the benefit of these things as it becomes almost too late or the crisis is so visible to us. I mean, healthcare is overtaking a larger and larger percent of our GDP, whether we're talking about, states, federal government, school districts, communities, and businesses. I mean, we in Vermont, Burton Snowboards decided to move a lot of their manufacturing to Europe because they could start with a better bottom line because their workers were taken care of and had access to quality, affordable healthcare without them having to pay more and more out of their own bottom line. And so, we look at something like climate change, and until the solutions are so expensive, so valuable that they have this, sort of ability to monetize the transition to cleaner energy and a different economy, we're all suffering because they're waiting for that price point to get so painful. So it's really our job to try and show people what's coming and ask people to make that hard decision to sacrifice and make a change and go into the unknown before what we know is absolutely unlivable, which it's becoming more and more. So I'm not surprised to see Republicans recognize that and then find the right moment to take credit for it and move things forward. And it's what I worry about with progressives. We don't do enough hard research and sort of market research about where people are. But the reality is when we do switch to these solutions, it's going to be too late unless we convince people that we need to we need to be forward thinking in how we look at some of these intractable challenges.
Yeah, one thing about healthcare that I don't think people think about sometimes, and I've shared this anecdote with my audience before, but I volunteered for Bernie in 2020 in a handful of states, and one of them I went to Vegas and volunteered there before the Nevada primary, and I actually got to speak with somebody who had been involved with some of the negotiations for the union there in Vegas that does a lot of the hotels, casino workers, et cetera, restaurant workers. It's a huge union, right, that does most of the strip. And they said, you wouldn't believe how much of our leverage and our capital and our resources goes to negotiating a good healthcare system. If that was already there to start with, we could direct those resources to, let's get better pay, let's get better workplace condition, let's get better, more time off, maternity, paternity leave, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people might not always consider the reverberating effects of Medicare for all. And that also extends to business owners, which I think speaks a little bit to what Ramona was talking about, as the Republicans start to realize, oh boy, we're paying for our employees' healthcare right now, and that could be taken off of our books. And yeah, I think that's a really critical point. So to just press you a little bit on the politics of it, I think one of the difficult things for progressives to wrestle with, I suppose, is this, like, how do we work within the system to get as much change as possible while also making sure that we're an outside pressure on that institution that has so failed us? I think this can be a very difficult line to walk, to kind of be an agent for change, and at the same time not so alienate everybody that you can't actually get anything done. I know it's a very vague, difficult question, but if you could just speak a little bit to how you can try to walk that line.
Yeah, so what I call it, and what I've thought about is, I'm a candidate who can go from being in the weeds to in the streets. And I think that's what people really are asking for and need out of their member of Congress, in particular a state like Vermont, where we have one member of Congress. Nothing can replace, I've served the longest of anyone running in this race. I've served for a decade in the legislature. I was raised in the legislature doing this work, and seeing that, you can't dislocate the economy overnight. You can't get these changes to happen right away. When you look at something like a carbon tax, which we've toyed with on the progressive side of the party, we have to look at British Columbia putting money in people's hands and then instituting the carbon tax. And so the details really matter when we want to create a bold progressive agenda. You have to do it in a way that you're bringing people with you, or the pendulum swings back. After our failed attempt to try and advance universal health care, it was also at the same time that we were trying to get a lot of dollars for our healthcare exchange, and our healthcare exchange was failing. And people stopped trusting government. We were set back probably a decade in terms of, even in a pretty liberal progressive state like ours, people believing that government could do things better than the private sector. So we have to remember that unless we're responsible players, we lose people. And that's just a reality of governing. So, as Cornel West or others would say, you also have to give people a sense of hope around the means of production. You have to know that part of it. You can't just say, no capitalism and throw up your hands. You have to build a bridge to what's next. And, I think that takes going from being in the weeds to in the streets and knowing what people need, but also getting back into the policy details, because that's where you can, that's where peril lies if you're not paying close enough attention and you don't really know how the budget works. You can't tweet out your governing policies and your legislation.
Thank you so much, Kesha Ram Hinsdale, for joining us. Thank you for running. And can you let people know how they can support you, how they can volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. We're going to win this race one new supporter at a time. So Kesha for Vermont is the website, KESHA for Vermont, all spelled out.com. It's a place where people can chip in. We have an $8.02 donation. Folks may not know from around the country, but 802 is our one area code in Vermont. So, it's a number that we think about a lot here in the state. And, we have places where people can email, get involved by signing up, look at our emails, sign up for petitions, figure out how to get engaged through the communications we're putting out. And pretty soon we'll have a much more robust field operation, phone banks, and ways for people to get involved. Our primary is August 9th in Vermont. So I know we're all focused, on Texas and, other southern states that have primaries coming up a lot earlier. And, I want progressives to win those races as well. And then I ask folks to turn their attention to the brave little state of Vermont for our August 9th primary and support me in this race. And I can't thank you enough for having me and helping me get the word out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And just for the audience, I have had the website and Twitter handle for Kesha up on the screen throughout this. So they'll also be in the description box if you're interested in learning more or getting involved there in Vermont. Thank you so much for taking the time, Kesha. We really appreciate it. And great to speak with you as always, Ramona. We'll be back next week.
Thanks so much for having me.